Thanks for being here and thanks for your interest. We're going to have more to say about Ron and Don Williams. I'm not going to take the time right now to introduce them fully. We'll do that when they speak at 9:30 that hour. But we're certainly glad that Ron and Don are here, or Don and Ron, whichever one you call them, and I bet they've answered for years to another name, so feel free to get to know them and just make a note and pray for their dad. He's on hospice right now, and we know what that means, and they know what that means. He's in Amory, Mississippi. He's preached all of his life, and so these are preachers' boys. And but to remember, what's your dad's name? Joe. That's right. So remember Joe Williams and all the family as they deal with what lies ahead for them. Let's have a prayer. Father, we're truly grateful for today. We're so thankful that we're able to be here. This is a good day. And we're thankful that as a congregation we have the opportunity to have Ron with us and Don with us, and we're thankful for their knowledge. We're thankful for their expertise. We're thankful for their willingness. We're thankful for their love for you, their love for the church, their love for the lost, their love for those that are grieving. Help us as individuals and as a congregation to be zealous about our love and our responsibilities toward one another, and especially today as we think about those that are grieving. We're mindful of Joe Williams, and we pray for him and pray for that family and pray for peace. And pray for Don as he delivers this first lesson. We offer this prayer in the name of Christ. Amen.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. We don't get to choose our weather. I guess God chooses it for us. And we're grateful for the opportunity of being here. And Chris, I wanted to ask a question. If I move from here, will it not pick up? Do I need to stay right here?
If you could stay in that general vicinity, it would be fine. The mic back here is picking up for the recording.
Okay, that's great.
Good.
So if I moved around a little, no problem?
Yeah,
okay,
you're good.
Great, all right. Hope everybody's got a handout, and we're going to look at Just Walk With Me in just a moment. But first of all, just a couple of preliminary ideas. Anytime you need to get up and move around, feel free to do so. I bet there's some really good donuts over there, but we had breakfast this morning earlier, but all the calories were taken out of those donuts, I'm sure. If you did not get a handout for the day, if you want to raise your hand, we'll get one to you down front here, because we'll be using those. Those will be some resources that you can take with you. And we're just grateful for the opportunity of being able to be here. Sometimes people will ask us the question, how did you get into this work? Both Ron and I have been full-time ministers for over 40 years. For the last 14 years, I've been the executive director of the North Alabama Christian Children's Home in Florence, Alabama, after 30 years of full-time preaching. But that's still a ministry, and we just have a smaller congregation. Right now, 11 children ages 7 to 18, and sometimes it seems like 40. But anyway, we're blessed by that opportunity to be able to minister to them. But it was in a workshop that we were at, either a pre-Arnold lectures or someplace, and I heard a fellow by the name of Bill McDonald, who is a funeral home director in Centerville, Tennessee, also an elder of the church there. And he was talking about preachers and grief. And he made the statement in his lecture that preachers are the second equipped group of people to deal with grief. Well, I sort of took exception to that. So afterwards, I go up to him and I said, "What did you mean by that?" He said, "Well, tell me what you do when somebody in your church has a loved one that passed away." I said, "Well," I said, "I call them, we'll go to see them." "Great. What do you do after that?" I said, "Well, I go to the funeral home visitation." "Great. What do you do after that?" I said, "Well, I go to the funeral if at all possible." "Great. What do you do after that?" And I thought, well, and he said, "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." We think our duties are done once we've signed that register at the funeral home, and yet their journey is just beginning, and they need someone to go with them on that journey. I had to admit that I was guilty often of not thinking of that way. He recommended a few books and began to do some research on that, and then Ron was down in L.A., that's Lower Alabama, in Evergreen, and he, in 1992, said, "Hey, we started a grief class, and it's really going well," so he sent me the material, and I was in Gadsden, Alabama, which is sort of west Alabama, and so we started doing a grief support class, and ever since then, I guess this year will be my 30th year of doing a local grief support class. We did one this past year at our local congregation where I'm a deacon at Florence Boulevard Church of Christ there in Florence. But 600, 700, 800 people have been a part of those classes during those times. I've learned a great deal from them. Ron is a cancer discussion consultant. I don't know what the proper term is, but he teaches a class. He's also a state trooper chaplain. I'm a fire chaplain for our local county. Been a palliative care chaplain. 1992, got a certificate of completion from the University of Alabama in thanatology, fancy word for the study of death. And so continue to learn. I've written a couple of books about the subject, which you'll see later on. But my hope is that you can gain something from us, but we may gain far more from you than you gain from us, and that's no problem whatsoever. We don't want this to be a lecture, so feel free to make comments, ask questions, as the case may be. Interrupt, raise your hand if by chance we don't give that opportunity, because we're here to learn, and hopefully we can do that. Let's look at Just Walk With Me, and you can follow along as I read this. This perhaps is maybe where you believe or you think about what you feel this morning. I have a problem. I want to tell you about it, but no, I really don't. I'd rather keep it to myself, handle it alone. I do think it'd be good for me to share it with you, though, and I don't want to because of what you'll say or how you'll act. I'm afraid you're going to feel sorry for me in a way that makes me feel pathetic, like I'm some poor thing. I'm afraid you'll try to cheer me up, that you'll give me words or texts or prayers that tell me to settle away, to stop feeling bad. If you do that, I'll feel worse, but hide it behind my obedient, cheerful smile. I'll feel you don't understand. I'll feel you're making light of my problem, but like it can be brushed away with some brief words of cheer. I'm afraid you might give me an answer, but this problem I've been wrestling with for some time now, and I've had endless thoughts you will belittle. You mean you can answer in a half minute what I've struggled with for weeks, maybe even months? I'm afraid also you might ignore my problem, talk quickly about other things, or tell me of your own. I'm afraid, too, that you might see me stronger than I really am, not needing you to listen and care. It's true I can get along alone, but I shouldn't have to. What I'd really like is for you to just walk with me. Listen as I begin some blundering, clumsy way to break through my fearfulness of being exposed as weak. Hold my hand and pull me gently as I falter and begin to draw back. Say a word, make a motion or a sound that says, "I'm with you." If you've been where I am, tell me how you felt in a way that I know you're trying to walk with me, not change me. But I'm afraid that you'll think I'm too weak to deserve respect and responsibility. Or you'll explain to me what's happening with labels and interpretation. Or you'll ask, well, what are you going to do about it? Please just walk with me. All those other things seem so much brighter and sharper, smarter and expert. But what really takes love is to just walk with me. I'm sure what I want is people who have a shepherd as their model. People who in their own way bring to others an experience of the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Question: why is it difficult for others to walk with us in our grief?
They never about been in maybe your particular shoes.
They've
Their
never been
situation.
in your particular shoes. Very true. Why else are people afraid to talk with you or say something to you about your loss or losses?
We don't know what kind of word. We don't know what words to say.
We don't often know what to say. Very true. Very true. I'll say this over and over and over again today, but nothing takes the place of your presence.
That's it.
It's not what you say, it's just being there that means so very much.
Right. More so than saying anything a lot of times, just your presence.
We often use a session, we won't do it today, but we often have a session where we talk about what to say and not to say. Because it's a long list of terrible things that sometimes people who mean well say often the wrong things. But yeah, we're afraid of what to say, and so we may not say anything. And we may not go, as the case may be. And sometimes in difficult situations, we really don't understand it. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. And so those are some of the reasons. Maybe we're afraid of the emotions that we might bring up, whether to ourselves or to them. You know, the question that typically people will ask folks who are in a grief journey is, how are you doing? The number one answer typically is, I'm fine. And why is it that people say that? And too many people in grief journeys have said, because that's what they want me to say. Or maybe right now I am feeling that way, but give me a couple of hours, whatever the case may be. I was reading an article last night about Christmas wrapping paper. And the lady said, you would think that there are certain things that just don't bother us. But she said it was around the holidays and somebody brought out a roll of Christmas wrapping paper, and it brought back all these emotions because my daddy, who had just died, was the one. We always had the ritual of going early to Dollar General and buying Christmas wrapping paper together. And now he's no longer here. And so just a roll of Christmas wrapping paper brought all these emotions back. Well, we all have feelings. And there are going to be emotions. And that's no problem whatsoever. And if today, you choose to shed a tear or so, that's no problem whatsoever either. But we just need to understand that a lot of times we're afraid to walk with people for those reasons. With that idea in mind, let's look at what do you know about grief and loss. These come from a great book by Therese Rondo, How to Go On Living When Someone You Love Dies. And they're either true or false, and we can sort of think about these in regards to our discussion. Number one, it normally takes 1 year to get over your grief. False. There's several things wrong with that statement. First of all, there's a time frame. I'm here to tell you that the younger you are, the longer you're going to grieve. Now, it may be in different ways. It may be less as time goes on. But typically, grief stays with you in some form the rest of your life. Here's the simple equation for grief. Love plus loss equals grief. Think about that. If I love someone and then I lose someone, that's going to add up to grief. Love plus loss equals grief. And so, just because time goes by, still there is going to be sometimes in maybe a diminished way, the grief that I feel. Also, the word normal. Everybody deals with grief in different ways. And so there's not necessarily a normal way to grieve. There's your way to grieve. And certainly we don't want to hurt ourselves or do things that can injure ourselves physically or otherwise. But there's nothing normal about it. And then there's that phrase, get over. I've had too many people in classes say that they would come up to me and say, well, it's been 6 months and so and so. You should be over that by now. It's not a cold. It's not a flu. It's not something like that a person can, in time with medicine, get over. But yeah, a lot of times people think of it that way. So that one certainly is false. Number 2, all bereaved people grieve in the same way. We just mentioned that. Helen Steiner Rice put it this way: grief is a solitary journey. No one but you can know how great the hurt is. No one but you can know the gaping hole left in your life when someone you love has died. And no one but you can mourn the silence that was once filled with laughter and song. It is the nature of love and of death to touch every person in a totally unique way. Comfort comes from knowing that the other people have made the same journey. And solace comes from understanding how others have learned to sing again. But we just need to understand that people are not going to grieve in the same way. I appreciate in the prayer being mentioning our dad. Dad preached for 67 years. He has hardening of the lungs. We know that's not going to get any better. He's been on oxygen for about a year now. Juan was there the first part of the week. I was there till Friday, staying with him. And we know that, it's getting closer. Maybe a month or even less. But, there's a whole lot better place waiting for him. Mom passed away about 2.5 years ago with Alzheimer's. And so we know that that's the case. But we're going to grieve. There'll be a lot of commonalities, but at the same time, there may be some differences, even in the way that he and I grieve. And we just need to understand that in the same family, people may grieve differently. Number 3, children grieve in ways that are different than adults. Very true. Children are often referred to as the forgotten grievers. A lot of times we mean well, but we don't remember the children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren. Here's the norm. If you're old enough to love, you're old enough to mourn. A 3-year-old can love, can they not? Sure. Sure they can. And so they may not be able to articulate it. They may not be able to put it into words. But that doesn't mean that they don't have sad feelings and that they aren't sad because of the loss of granddaddy or great-granddaddy. And so we need to be sure that in our grief that we include them in that journey as well. 44% of children learned about the death of someone significant because they heard adults whispering over in the corner. Maybe they didn't think about telling them that Uncle Grady had died or that great-granddaddy or granddaddy had died. The children are very much, they understand. If nothing else, they can read your emotions. They wonder why mom and dad are crying and why, auntie is, they can see that. And so we need to understand the longest chapter in the book that Ron and I wrote, Walking with Us, we deal with children in grief. I remember some years ago, there was a good teacher of the local system there in Florence, Alabama. That's where I live, out in the country, had died, and there were 6 adult children. And so they asked me to meet with them and to do the funeral. And so they, as well as the husband, was there. and their mates. And after I talked with them, and basically I asked them the question, what would you like for people to know about your mom? Wonderful, wonderful lady. And so we spent, 30 minutes or so just listening to what they had to say. And then afterwards I said, do you mind if I meet with your children? They said, we want you to. There were 18 of them. I remember we were in the music room of the funeral there out in the country. And they were just lining the walls from 6 up to 24 years of age. And I just asked them a question. What do you want folks to know about your grandma? And then they just began to just talk. It was just like you had given them the green light. And they began to tell all these stories and all the things that she did and the favorite things she perhaps cooked. And the one that stood out was there was a golf cart there on the farm, and that she would always ride them in the golf cart. And one day they said they were riding down the golf cart, and the golf cart began to smoke and began to sort of fire ignite. And he said, you should have seen our grandmother. She was throwing us off that thing right and left, and then she went over and dug the dirt and began to throw it on the fire and put it out. Guess what I told at the funeral? It wasn't that she had died, but how she lived and what impression she made. Children need to have that opportunity. I've had people tell me stories about an uncle that died and how that they had put an angel statue there at his tombstone, and how that the 5-year-old nephew would go and visit and talk to him, that young uncle, standing beside that angel statue. Or another story about a grandson that drew a picture of his granddaddy in the casket and then gave that to the grandmother, and how important that was, how meaningful it was. So let's just be sure that when we're talking to the family, let's talk to the little ones as well. They may have some insights that we're not aware of. I'm sorry. Yes, at the Sunday school class, Ron will be teaching in here. I believe it's in here, right?
There is a class in
Yes.
here, yes.
On how to talk to children about grief and loss. Now, that's not for the children, but that's for the adults and such like, how you can help your children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren in regards to their losses. But that's what that class is going to be about, and Ron will be teaching that in here. I had a lady friend who had lost her husband very suddenly, a heart attack. And she said at the funeral, the 10-year-old granddaughter was just sort of twirling around and just sort of moving and sort of jumping around at the funeral home visitation. And it was sort of right in front of the casket. And the wife with her grief was aggravated that why was her granddaughter doing like this? And so she finally went over to her and she said, honey, you don't need to do this in public like this. I don't know what you're doing. She said, Grandma, don't you remember that when we came to your house, we would always have these performances and so-and-so might sing and I was taking these classes, and so I would do a recital and I would do my twirling around. And she said, that's what I'm doing now in honor of Granddaddy. And she was so glad that she had asked the question. It wasn't that she was being offensive. She was just showing her love of what she normally did in the presence of her granddaddy. Number 4, holidays and anniversaries of death or losses give off great amounts of anguish and pain. Very, very true. The person at the holiday season feels this flood of emotions. That's natural, because holidays were always very, very important to you. Or the anniversary of that death, or the anniversary of this was your mate that passed away. Those flood of emotions are going to come back. Typically, 8 million people every year look at the holidays in a unique way because that loved one's not physically present with them. Millions of people wish that the calendar would stick from November 1st and flip all the way to January 2nd because you think about Thanksgiving and Christmas. And in fact, in the book Walking with Those Who Weep, there's a chapter on grief for the holidays. So if a person deals with that, it's because it's very much a part of it. Number 5, the threat of divorce is a real probability after a child dies. The key word here is probability. All of us perhaps know someone who lost a child and then, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years later, they lose their marriage. Possibility? Yes. Let me just give it to you this way. The Compassionate Friends is a national organization. I don't know if there's one here in Gadsden. Probably Birmingham is the closest one. But the Compassionate Friends is a national organization that deals with 2 kinds of losses. The loss of a child at any age and the loss of siblings, brothers or sisters. They did a study of some 600 couples years removed from the death of their child, asking them the question, what about their marital state? Here's what they found out. 74%, 3 out of 4, were still married. Then also, they went ahead to say that 14% of them were widowed. They lost their mate during that period of time to death. 12% were divorced, but of the 12%, only 4% said that the death of the child had anything to do with the death of the marriage. About 10 years later, that study was reaffirmed and basically was the same thing. So statistics don't suggest the idea that it has to be that way. If it is, then perhaps there are other issues going on. So possibility, naturally, but not necessarily probability. And we need to keep that in mind. Number 6, losing someone to sudden death is the same as losing someone to an anticipated death. That's false. That's false. Sometimes people might even try to argue about the nature of those kinds of losses. And they may say, well, at least you got to be with your loved one in their terminal illness. You got to hold their hand. You got to say, goodbye to them. We didn't have that opportunity with the sudden loss that we dealt with. But then folks in that other camp may say yes, but you didn't have to see them the pain that they had to deal with. You didn't have to see them with the demise of all their faculties and whatever. It's a moot point. Grief comes in one size, extra large. And today in this class, this church, the greatest loss or losses are yours, whatever it is. But we do need to understand that there are differences between a sudden loss and an anticipated loss. I used to be a police chaplain for Lauderdale County there in the Florence area. And on occasion, they would call me and say there has been a death, or there has been a shooting, or there's been a drowning, and we need you to go and talk to the family. I'd put on my uniform, I'd go with the uniformed officer, and in a matter of, whenever we got there, within 15 minutes, I'm having to give them information that's going to just, really turn their world upside down. But that loved one that they perhaps just saw hours before, or that they just talked to, had been involved in a car accident, or there had been a heart attack at work, or whatever the case may be. COVID certainly has not made things any easier with people's illness and the death that have resulted from that. And that's something that is sudden and unexpected. A neighbor up the street, which was the high school principal there in our area, I performed his wedding 25 years ago this year. He was Big Daddy. That was my nickname for him. Big, good fella, good Christian man, part of a band. He got COVID and died within 3 weeks. And I see his, like I said, they're right up the street. I see his wife regularly and their children. We just need to understand that when there are sudden, unanticipated losses, there's less to go on, there's more questions, there's less answers initially, and it takes longer to work through that. again, in the book Walking with Those Who Weep, there's a chapter that deals with that. And please understand, that doesn't mean that that's greater than the other, but the point is, there's less to go on. We know that our father is getting worse. We see the demise of his condition. Our heart, wants him to get better, but we know that's not humanly possible. That doesn't negate the pain a person has, is even with an anticipated loss. But the point is, at least you're aware of it. If somebody has described it as walking down a road and somebody hits you from behind and knocks you over, you didn't see it coming. You didn't hear it. And all of a sudden, you're on the ground. Versus a person running at you and knocking you down. At least you saw it coming, even though you weren't prepared for it. The same is true with this. So, from a church point of view, we need to understand that with those sudden, unanticipated losses, that person is going to need a lot of help as they begin to process and perhaps try to find answers to what took place. Sometimes with suicides, there's often too many questions and not enough answers. And so we have to just understand that it's just going to take longer in that manner. Number 7, an adult will not be affected much if their parent dies. Doesn't matter how old you and I are, how old our parents are, it's going to affect us. What are the roles that a parent plays in the life of a child? Stability. Comforter. What else? Example. Your mentor. The first cheerleader. They're there, when most of us in this audience didn't have kindergarten, did we? But, the kindergarten graduation, or 6th grade, or 8th grade, or 12th grade, there when you get married, there for the birth of your grandchildren. Somebody said that the greatest sight to grandparents is the headlights of the car bringing the children and grandchildren home to visit them. The second greatest sight is 3 days later the taillights as they leave your home. We have, my wife and I have 2 boys and 5 grandchildren, and so we have a wonderful, we take a nap on Sunday afternoons after they leave because it's a good time, but it's a wearing out time. All those things. And so it doesn't matter how they pass away. It doesn't matter how long we have them. I remember somebody made the statement to one of our ladies in our grief class, well, you had your mom for so long. Well, think about it. Yeah, and I'd like to have her longer. It's not like you had a choice. That didn't really help her. It aggravated her, in fact, by that statement. So we just need to understand that we will be impacted. Number 8, your grief journey will consist of neat stages of feelings and emotions that come in orderly and structured ways.
No one.
That's false. I brought a picture of grief today, and here it is. The tangled ball of emotions. Ma'am, can I ask you what is at the center of that picture? Denial. Denial is very much a part of the grief process. And so there's nothing neat about it. A lot of times at the end of the 10 weeks when we have our weekly class, somebody will come up and say, thank you for letting me know I'm really not crazy. I'm just going through grief. Because it is. It makes us feel strange ways. You begin to lose things and you think, what in the world is wrong with me? I'm looking for my glasses. You look everywhere and where are they? All kinds of things of that nature. One lady at one time had gone to the grocery store, which is sometimes a drudgery, especially if your husband often went with you, and now this is like some of the first times that you've gone. And so she'd come in and she brought her groceries in and they were in her hand, and so rather than just leaving them there in the kitchen, she went on back to her bedroom and was going to put them down, and she was going to change clothes for the night and whatever. And so she thought, well, while I'm back here, I'm going to pull back the covers of the bed, and so she did that. And then she went back and began to put her groceries up. She said, wait a minute, I don't know where my bacon is. I just knew I bought bacon, but I can't find my bacon. Well, she looked everywhere and couldn't find it. A couple hours later, she got ready to go to bed. She went to her bed, she pulled back the covers, there was her bacon. And somehow, inadvertently, on top of the sack, there was the bacon, and she had taken them out, and she just put it there. She said, I'm losing my mind. I'm putting my bacon to bed. It's going through grief. So, if we understand that it's this, and there's nothing, we don't use the word stage, because stage suggests a step-by-step progression. You can be in several phases at one time, and you can be back and forth. And you may think, okay, I finally got over shock, and then all of a sudden, 4 weeks later, you wake up thinking, wait a minute, this was just a bad dream. They're here. They're alive. And then you go through that again. Nothing fancy about it. And so if we can keep that in mind, then that's the case. I'm doing too much talking. Somebody have a question or comment concerning anything? Yes, ma'am.
My mother passed away in December was a year ago. There's a lady in the neighborhood where my mother was living, and she has Alzheimer's, and I know that. She walks in the neighborhood, and about 3 or 4 days a week she'll stop by and she'll ask me how my mother is doing. How is it? I mean, she's been told multiple times. But I mean, she was there last Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday afternoon. She came by to see how my mother was doing.
Yeah. We choose our battles in regards to things that we often say to people. And with that situation where probably within 5 minutes you can't remember that she was even visiting with you, I would probably just say something like, she's fine, and then just go on from there. Thank you for asking. And then just move on to another subject.
She wants to come in the house and see her though.
Yeah. And just say, well, it's not a good time to do so. And then just go on from there, because
She's not here right now.
that's a good one too. She's not here right now. But thank you for asking. And then change the subject. With dementia, and Ron and I also do dementia and cancer workshops, but with especially Alzheimer's, you have to deflect and just reroute them to another subject, because they want to go home, and so you can just this is your you can go through all of that, or you can try to deflect and say, have you seen this weather outside? What do you think about that? Should we go out there in the snow? I mean, just completely go another direction. How about them Chiefs, or whatever you want to bring up? Just anything to sort of make it different. But they don't have the capacity, and so I would suggest probably something like that as best you can, and then hopefully she'll take the lead on that. I can imagine that sort of bothers you whenever it just keeps on a regular basis, and I know that would be sort of hard to do, but does she walk alone, or does she walk with, okay, she walks alone, so I'm grateful that she can find her way back home, right now, and whatever. How long has she dealt with this illness?
Oh, probably 5 years or more.
Yeah. Anybody else have an idea on that one? That's a good question. Thank you for asking that. Anything else? Any other comments as we continue on? The next one. The words, I know how you feel, can be of great comfort in time of loss. Oh. Too many people have said, Don, that did not help me. Why did it not help me? Because they don't know how I feel. There's a preacher's wife. I won't tell you who she is, but she endured the death not of one husband, but of two. One to cancer, And then the second one, when they were vacationing in Gulf Shores, had a heart attack. And she told me in the grief class that we had that when people said to her, "I know just how you feel," she said, "I wanted to poke them." I said, "I'm sure glad you didn't do that." I said, that'd make the headlines. Preacher's wife lays out so-and-so. I mean, that just wouldn't look too good. But we truly don't know how someone feels. So I said, well, I had the same loss, yeah, but different relationship. In other words, here may be a person who lost a mother in the same exact way as someone else's mother. But that person may have lived 300 miles from their mom. You live next door. That loss is completely different because it changes your entire routine, your entire daily lifestyle. 300-mile daughter, great, wonderful, love. She may have called 3 times a day. Still, it was a different situation. And so we just need to understand. So what do you say? I love what one lady told me in our class. She said, "Don," she said, "whenever I go up to the family and they're standing beside their deceased, they're in the funeral home, I will say, 'I don't know how you feel, but can I give you a hug?'" And I thought, wow, how simple that is. You truly don't understand how they're feeling, but you care. Grieving people want to know that from you. That you truly don't know how they feel, but you still care. And as long as you care, they may forgive you for some of the things that a person may say or whatever, simply because the care is there. So it's not what you say, but those words, more often than not, have set people off in the wrong way. Even though that's the number one thing we often say. Worst case scenario. First class I taught in Winfield, Alabama, which was right there near Hewitt. And this family was there, and their adult son had been killed in a car accident. To make it worse, it was near their home. To make it even more worse, they were the ones that had found him. 3 nights later, they're having the visitation. Neighbors come up to them and say, "We know just how you feel. We buried our dog last week." I looked at the mom and I said, "What did you say?" And she said, "I just thought to myself, they don't understand. The animals are important, but they don't equal, in this regard, the loss of a son." And so we just got to be careful how we use that phrase. And there may be commonalities, and I'm not saying that you don't bring up, when your husband dealt with the same cancer that my husband dealt with when he passed away, I wonder, you're asking a question. You're not saying this is how I felt, but you're asking a question. Or I don't know how you felt, but this was something that I came up with. Again, you're giving your thoughts, not saying it's the same as theirs. That may bring up some communication. That may bring up some help in that manner. Ron, like I said, teaches a cancer class regularly there in the Huntsville area. And I'm sure that there are people who sometimes have common cancers and deal with those things. They're not, again, saying, this is how you're to feel because this is how I felt. It's just like, this is how I felt. How did you feel? That might bring up questions in that regard. But we just need to be careful about that statement. Number 10, disenfranchised grief suggests a loss that either is not publicly recognized in the relationship or a loss that is not openly or publicly accepted. That's true. If you want to do some research on disenfranchised loss, Kenneth Doka, D-O-K-A, came up with this concept. COVID has made it worse in the sense that those are losses that we don't often hear a great deal about. Sadly, in the throes of COVID, A person might not be able to have the funeral that normally people have. Or in some cases, a person may have had a funeral, private visitation, and be buried before you even knew about it. That was a loss that took place but was not openly acknowledged. It wasn't readily known. Or perhaps in some cases a person may have a loss that they don't understand the relationship. Maybe somebody at work is going through, trying time, and you say, man, just not the same, what's going on? He said, well, I lost my stepdad the other day. Well, I'm sorry. And you think, well, wait a minute. He's not even biologically related to him. What you may not know is that was the only dad he ever knew. That was the dad that came into his life and his mom's life at just the right time. Or maybe a loss because of an afflicted child. Down syndrome. Gene Stallings was the football coach for Alabama for years. You may recall the story. They had a son named John Mark that lived for 46 years or so. He's passed away, of course, by now. But imagine if somebody were to come up to him and his wife and say, well, I know things are easier now that you don't have to see after him. Excuse me? It didn't matter how many chromosomes he did or did not have. That was our child conceived in love, and we will and will continue to grieve for him. Those are disenfranchised losses. Suicide. Understand that there are families that are hurting. There are families that, or weren't a part of any decision that someone made that still are hurting. And we just need to be sure that we're there for them in the midst of them. Because sometimes people say, well, I didn't understand the relationship, or I didn't understand that, and so I won't attend. No, they're still hurting. Love plus loss equals grief. And so, just because I may not understand the nature of the relationship, or the nature of the death, or the nature of the situation, still doesn't mean that I should not be able to be a part of it and show our care and concern. 11. Lengthy chronic illnesses such as Alzheimer's prepare the survivors and prevent complications at the time of loss. To me, people say, Don, it didn't matter how long they dealt with this cancer. It didn't matter how long they dealt with that Alzheimer's. The median for that is about 6 to 6.5 years. When they died, I was in complete shock. Why? Because we deal with our heart versus our head. Our heart, a person can get better. There's another preventive measure. There's another surgery, whatever the case may be. Versus the head, we see the demise of their condition. We see that the doctors will say, I've done all that I can do. All those things. But at the same time, we need to understand that with that long-term illness, even though you begin to grieve before their death, and that's often natural, still, when the death takes place, there's a great deal of loss, a great deal of pain. And just because you knew that ultimately they were going to pass away, it doesn't get you ready for it. And then number 12, time heals all wounds. It's true even with the wound of grief. It's what you do with your time. Attend a class like this. Read the good materials. Be a part of the support group. One lady in my class who lost her mom said, you can stop the bleeding, but you can't cover the scars. Janice Lord put it this way, not trying to deal with grief is like trying to cover up cancer with a Band-Aid. Really, really important that we do something with grief. It's not something you get over. It's not something you can go under. You've got to go through it. And that's going to take time. It's going to take effort. As we close this first session, are there any questions or any comments whatsoever? Let me also mention this. During the day, if you have a question, if you want to write it down, if it's where we can be able to try to answer it, feel free to do that. Write it down, give it to Chris or Kevin or us. Feel free to do it. You don't have to even put your name on it. But if there's a particular question that you would like to ask about this, if we don't know the answer, we can try to find the answer. We'd be glad to do that. Yes, sir.
I don't know what you're going to spend your time on today, but just real quick, in a couple of minutes or whatever, what do people grieve over? I mean, can you give us just some idea? Because a lot of people think about grief as just losing somebody. And that may be going to be covered somewhere today. If it is.
Yeah, that will be in the second session after worship at the 2 p.m. session.
Okay, all right, very
yes,
good.
we will, because that's again misconception. We only grieve over of the death of loved ones. No, there's a whole lot more than that. And so yes, at the 2 p.m. session, we will plan on starting with that. We certainly will.
That's a great teaser right there.
There you go.
We did a good job.
There you go. There you go. In closing, Doug Manning says there's 3 great suggestions concerning grief. You don't have this in your notes, so if you want to write these 6 words down, then this is important. First of all, he says you just get by. Get by. What does getting by mean? It may mean getting up out of bed. It may be beginning to do the things that you used to do after your loss. At first, all you got to do is get by. Secondly, he says you try to get better. What does getting better may mean? Well, you may begin to do family things a little at a time. You may begin to venture out. Some people have a hard time going to grocery stores because there's just too many memories. So you begin to slowly begin to do that. Thirdly, in grief, there's no time frame from the first one to the third one. You try to get beyond. He didn't say over. He said beyond. That's always a part of you. You try to get beyond. You're not going to get over it, but hopefully you can go through it and you can grow through it. So get by, get better. Thirdly, in time to come, get beyond. Thank you so much for your kind attention, for your comments, and we'll be having worship here shortly. So I guess we'll be going that way.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thank you so much.